This is where we're headed in this next lesson. Adding the sleeves, adding the shoulder pads, adding the sleeve heads. It's going to produce this beautiful sleeve that's set in. So let's have a look at what it's going to look like when we're done. This is a close-up of what we're going to achieve. Setting the sleeve in, setting the shoulder pad, and installing the sleeve head. So, as you can imagine, there's quite a lot to do, so let's get busy. So we have all of the pieces for installing the sleeve. As you can see here, here's the sleeve, here's the body. What I have done here and here, I have prepared the shoulder pads. I have also prepared the sleeve heads. So we need one sleeve, one shoulder pad, one sleeve head for the installation. So first I'm going to show you a video on how to prepare shoulder pads and how to create sleeve heads. You need the proper shoulder pads when you're fitting your muslin and when you're installing the shoulder pad into the garment. This is the finished product, so as you can see, I have a directional arrow that tells me which is the front, and I also have a little clip to tell me where that aligns with the shoulder. Now, what we want to do here, first off, is to address the thickness, because here I have actually removed some of the thickness from this pad. I found it was a little too thick. I prefer a pad that is about a 1/2 inch thick. So after we remove the thickness, then we adjust the armhole curve based on the pattern that we're working with. So, a lot of work to do, so let's get busy. We start with a piece of paper with the line drawn. So then what we're going to be doing is lining up the shoulder seam with that line, and we want to just copy off the cut edge of the seam allowance, and it's also good to know where the shoulder ends, because the shoulder pad itself is actually going to go right out to the cut edge of the seam allowance when you are installing it. So now I have, this is the front, and then I'm going to join the back stitching line on top of the front, and we're going to copy the back. There we are. So we know which is the front and which is the back. You don't necessarily have to go through such an elaborate process. You could actually, if you wanted to, just join these two together to get this line, but it's just a little easier for demonstration to have it on a separate piece of paper. So from here, what I'm going to do is just cut this, because this is going to be the template for the sleeve when we get ready to adjust the edge of the shoulder pad. But before we adjust the edge of the shoulder pad, we want to adjust the thickness of the shoulder pad. Now, as I said earlier, some people shy away from putting shoulder pads in garments because they believe that they make the shoulders look too thick. In any tailored garment, I like at least a little bit of shape. So I prefer this kind of shoulder pad because it has different layers. So you can really carefully modulate how much you remove. And if you have one high shoulder, you can add some in or lower. You have a little more flexibility in adjusting the pad. So to adjust the pad, the first thing you want to do is take off the stitching. There's not a lot of stitching here. Now, I tend to leave the stitching around the perimeter if that's an option. And so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go off camera and remove all of this stitching in here, and I will bring you back the results. Okay, so we have removed the stitching. So what I'd like to do is I would like to take out 3 of these pads out of the sandwich. So now that this is thinned down to the thickness you wish, the next step is going to be just with the running stitch. This is a light stitching. Don't go too crazy about pulling tension. What you just want to do is, I like to start roughly in the middle, and don't really worry about these stitches looking a certain way. You just want them to lightly hold the layers in place, and stop within an inch of the cut edge, because you're going to be trimming that cut edge somewhat, so you don't want to nick the stitches that you've put in to hold this pad together. And yes, it is somewhat like watching paint dry. So I'm going to tie off this lightly, and then I will rein out the thread and continue on the other side. See, this doesn't take long at all. And it doesn't have to be pretty. This is going to be inside the garment, remember that. Okay, so now that this is finished, we will go over to the pressing table to press these into shape. So here's the pressing ham, and here is the pad that we just stitched. So really, you want to just steam and shape, and you can put the iron down on this if you really want to. Okay, so you let it cool, and I've worked off camera to produce the other one. So now let's go back to the work table. So here we are back from the pressing table. Now the question that comes up is, which way is the front? I think I covered this earlier, but it bears repeating. So the mnemonic that I use is fat goes to the front, skinny back. So that tells me that these face that way, and there's no shame in writing arrows on them. I do that all the time. So now the notch, that generally lines at the shoulder seam. You could, when you're testing the garment, when you're using these, because you really want to have your shoulder pads prepared before you try on the muslin, and that's why I'm putting it at this point before we do the pattern making. If you want it sitting a little further forward, a little further back, then you would remark the shoulder, but I'm assuming for this particular jacket that those are going to be where the shoulder seam falls. So, understanding that faces the front, and so the object here, zoom in a little bit here, the object here is that you want the front and the back to hit the cut edge. So you can see what's hanging out. I'm just going to draw that sliver here. There, and it doesn't hurt to make a notch there. So you can see this amount here will get trimmed. Now really there's no mystery to trimming this. You just take your scissors and trim like so, and you see why I made this notch here, because you can lose the notch if you're trimming depending on the curve of the armhole. So then what you want is another notch cut right there. And so now that is one shoulder pad. I will go off camera and adjust the other shoulder pad and bring you back the results. Okay, so here we have the two shoulder pads prepared and ready for fitting, and then later ready for installing. You can see here on the pressing table I have a strip of bias. This is the self fabric. It can be wool, flannel, something like that. The width of the strip is 4 inches wide and say 11 or 12 inches long. This is what we'll make our sleeve head from. So our first step will be pressing. After we've pressed, we're going to press this over so that overlaps. It's about 3/8 of an inch to a 1/2 inch. I go with 1/2 inch. So we're going to press the strip lengthwise so we have one side peeking out from underneath the cut edge of the other. The next stop is the sewing machine. We want to sew with a zigzag. Zigzag width is 5.0, stitch length is about 2 to 2.5. We want to sew about 1/4 of an inch from the folded edge. Okay, there we are. And now back to the pressing table. Here's our strip, 11 inches long. sewn 1/4 inch in on a zigzag. The next step, we're going to press just over on that zigzag. So we press this over. It presses over, I'd say, about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. So this is the result. Next, I'm going to show you a magic trick. This is the magic trick. What we want to do is to shape the sleeve head so that it matches the curve of the sleeve cap. And this is done in one fast move. So I'll have you watch. You ready? Here goes. Did you get that? Now we have the sleeve head shaped exactly as we need it for installation. One last move here is just to round off these corners. Sorry about that. So we round those off, and same thing here. So you don't have a pointy corner sitting in there. Not absolutely necessary, but it's just better. Back to the work table. So now that we have all of the parts and pieces prepared, we're ready to put the sleeves into the jacket. Now you notice I have this laid out so that this sleeve bows this way and this sleeve bows this way. They're facing the center front. Since I am dyslexic, I like to lay these out because I have been known to get the wrong sleeves in the wrong armholes. So what I will do is I am going to be working on this side of the jacket. Now, this is how I determine where things ease. Here is the back seam. There's the front seam. What I like to do is fold it on the back seam. There we are. And so where these fold on the seam line, that's where I'm going to put my ease. So from this pin around to here. Now, I'm going to show you on the machine my little trick for stitching to draw this cap in. Wind Mara 30 onto your bobbin and then put it in the bobbin case and draw the Mara 30 up. This will prepare us for the next step. Loosen the upper tension to somewhere between 2 and 3. You can see here, this is one of the pins. I made marks there just so I know where I can put the pins. So I have the 2 pins visible. So now what we're going to do, we're going to go in here. And since we're using a 5/8 inch seam, we're going to sew the first row of stitching at 1/2 inch, or maybe a little past 1/2 inch. And this is a 5.0 stitch. This is the longest stitch you can get on your machine. And since I've loosened the bobbin, or loosened the top tension, we can now start stitching. Now we will turn the work 90 degrees, walk it one stitch, there we are, and then what we will do is we're turning it around and we're going back in the opposite direction. We will be sewing midway between the cut edge and the stitching. So you see here's the stitching here, cut edge, we're gonna center that. And if it's not dead on the center, it's not gonna kill you. You just want it roughly centered. Now, let me take the work out of the machine and show you the results. Now you notice, you can see here, the black thread falls down and it's much more visible. What this is going to do is this is going to make the easing slide much more easily. Loosening the thread and having the thick thread in the bobbin case is going to make drawing this sleeve cap just so easy. Now let's go over to the pressing table to continue. So here we are at the pressing table. Now, first step is don't be afraid of getting this wet. It's going to help you draw everything in. And then we're just going to grab these threads here. Let me just come in just a tiny bit here. So what you'll do first, before you start steaming, is you're going to just draw up this cap. And see that you turned around here. You don't have to worry about the threads pulling loose, which is very annoying. So I'm going to pull it in a little more. The trick here is you want to pull it in enough to draw in the cap ease, but you don't want to create puckers. And this, I find that using this stitching is going to help. So now we're going to start pressing. And having a sleeve board like this is extremely useful. If you don't have a sleeve board, you want one. So the object here is to shrink out any kind of puckers in this area. Now what I find is that it's a little easier to draw it up too much, because if you can shrink this down as much as you can, later on when you install this into the armhole, you can release it. You can let this stretch back out. So let's see, let me just press that. Now let's one more steam. Press. Okay, so I will allow that to cool for a moment and change camera angles. So here you can see a little closer what that's going to look like. Now that it's cool, what I will do is I'm going to flip this right sides out. And so if you bring this up, it may be a little short, but that's okay. That's better to have it too short than too long. So the object here is you want this seam allowance to be shrunk down, and you want it to lie flat inside the garment after you've set the sleeve into the armhole. Now that we have this step taken, I will meet you back at the work table. This is where we set the sleeve into the armhole. Now, the first thing I look at is where my matching notches are. And I have a matching notch at the underarm. So what I'm going to do here is start matching up notches. Now you're not going to catch the lining. You just want to catch the body. So what I will do is go off camera and match everything and bring you back the results. So you can see here, I'm finishing up. Now let me just show you down here. You're not catching the lining. Don't catch the lining. So now that I have this pinned together, what I'm going to do is I have threaded up a needle with the same thread that's in the machine, and I'm going to start. I like to baste the underarm first and then work my way around. So I will sew a few stitches, because you're just sewing just to the seam allowance side of your 5/8 inch. So you want this to be, when it's done, almost right up on the stitching line. So I'm going to continue off camera and meet you back here. Okay, so I have gone all the way around and I have arrived back where I began. So this is all basted together. Now you're probably wondering why you baste this. You can try it on. You can make sure that you didn't put the sleeves in backwards. Basting is half sewn. Now before I go over to the machine, one thing I want to do, let me turn this right side out. I want to go in and remove any of these tailor tacks. The thing is, if you catch them in the sewing machine stitches, they're going to be next to impossible to remove. So it's much easier to take them out at this point before you go to the machine. So I will finish removing the tailor tacks and meet you at the machine. So we're at the machine, as you can see, and there's not a great deal of mystery here, but I just think it's good for you to see how I run this through. It's really, we're just sewing a straightforward seam, the 5/8 inch seam allowance. But I like to sew the underarm first. Now the stitch length here is more like a 3.0. It doesn't have to be short. It could be a little longer because you have more thicknesses here. Now that's just a little tip to know, is that the thicker the fabric or the more thicknesses in the fabric, the longer the stitch. Now you notice the sleeve is close to the feed. The sleeve is against the bed of the machine. The feed dogs will help you to ease this sleeve in more easily. And having the stitching line here on the canvas, as you can see, is tremendously helpful. Almost done. where we started. And then we say a prayer of thanks to the person who invented the free arm. So, back to the work table. So we're back from the machine. The next step is installing the shoulder pad. So what I want to do here, turn everything right side out, and you can see here I have the directional arrow for the shoulder pad. Now let me just, I'm going to match this here with the seam. And you want to put the shoulder pad right out and even with the cut edge of the seam allowances. Don't have the shoulder pad stop back on the stitching line. That's going to give you something that's less than successful. So, first step, I like to secure one side and then walk it around to secure the other to here. So now I have it pinned. The next thing I want to do is to hand sew. I've threaded a needle, doubled. Now I'm using red because this is a demonstration. It's going to be inside the garment, so you're not going to see it. Normally I would just use what's in the machine. So the object here is you want to sew through the shoulder pad and all the thicknesses. And this is just a long, well, not long. This is, the stitches are about, say, 1/2 inch apart. This is just a running stitch, and it's a stab stitch. So you're, as you can see, we're just stabbing in and emerging. You can be right on the stitching line. You can be a little inside it. It works better, it's just a little inside it. But you want the stitches to be fairly close to that stitching line. So let me pull this stitch, and then you can see. So yeah, so this is just a big running stitch. So I will go off camera and meet you at the other end. Now, something to know when you're sewing, you don't want these stitches to be tight. You want them a little bit on the loose side. If you pull the stitches tight, you're going to get a wobble right along where the shoulder pad goes into the armhole. So just a nice loose tension so that it just holds everything together. And so then let's see, let me get this over to here. Okay, and so finally at the opposite end, we stitch. Let me just show you the result. So you can see here, and the stitches, they're not going to be perfect. This is inside a lining. No one's ever going to see it. So you can see here, see how close those red stitches are to the stitching line. That's as it should be. So the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to turn this right side out, because what we want to do is secure the shoulder pad. Now to secure the shoulder pad, because we're going to be tacking the edges to the canvas in front and the back stay. So there we are. There. So what you just want to do is make sure all of the seam allowances are facing into the sleeve, and you can feel where the shoulder pad is. And so you pin. Now I'm going to show you a little trick here. This is a little tip. At this point, you don't want any pins to snag your fabric. So you come through, up, and then There we are. Then you bury the point of the pin in between the layers. By doing that, what you're going to do is minimize the horrible likelihood of actually catching your fabric on one of those exposed pinpoints. And at this point, if you really ruin your fabric, you're just out of luck. So let me thread up a needle and I will bring it back and show you our next step. So you can see I have turned the shoulder pad inside out again, because what I want to do, and I'm going to be using a red thread on this too so you can see better what I've done, and double thread because safety first. You're going to start here and you're just tacking with a fairly large and loose catch stitch. You just want to loosely tack the shoulder pads to the canvas in the front and to the backstay in the back. Some people think I'm being a little bit too persnickety doing this, but what I have found is, especially if you're planning on getting this thing dry cleaned, at some point if you don't secure, and I'm just like to do a little tack right there where the shoulder seam is. If you don't tack these cut edges down on the shoulder pad, what's going to happen is that you're going to take it to the dry cleaners. They're going to clean it. The pad might curl. And then you have to open up the entire garment to get into there to fix it. So why create more work for yourself when just in a few moments before you have the lining in, you can just come in here and tack. So this then will keep you from shoulder pads that curl. Next, we install the sleeve head. This is the sleeve head that I made for this particular jacket. Now this is just a wool flannel. No big mystery here. What I like to do here is make a little cut there and round off these corners so that when it's inside the garment, it doesn't make any odd bunches or points. So this is the sleeve head. Now, how I like to put it in, I like to install it here. I like to have 1 inch from the end of the shoulder pad, and you're pinning this to the actual stitching line. When I sew, you're going to see a little better what I want to do. The object here is that when this is sewn, you won't see your machine stitching. This is going to cover the machine stitching. So when you're pinning, be mindful. And so I guess if you need a sort of a general rule, the general rule is closer is better. Air towards closer, it will take care of itself. If you're too far away, you're going to get some weird little gap. Okay, and so this is a little longer than I need it. So what I can do is I can trim it off to 1 inch. I find the 11 inches to make them is a good general rule, but you can trim them down after if you need to. So here, and that then goes there. So now, the sleeve head is pinned ready for sewing. Now, again, double thread, safety first. Yes, I'm a little old lady when it comes to that, but it's better at that than injuring someone. So now what I'm going to do here, zoom in, and we're going to sew. And the stitching, you want the stitching to be fairly close to the stitching that we sewed for the armhole. And so this is just a running stitch. You're just catching the seam allowance of the sleeve. You don't have to go through all the layers. And these stitches are about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch long. They're not long. So let me sew 2 or 3 stitches, and then I'm going to show you what we're wanting to achieve here as far as effect when we sew this in. Okay, I'm going to secure this here. See, the object here, if you're turning this out, you should really not be able to see your machine stitches. Maybe a teeny tiny bit, but again, err on the side of a little closer to the stitching line rather than too far away. Then your sleeve head will fit right into the fold where the seam allowance is, and it will pad out that sleeve cap. So I will continue across and meet you at the other end. Okay, almost to the end. Also, know the stitch tension on this is not tight. You just want to hold all these together. You don't need to worry about gale force winds. Okay, so there is that. So now let's just look at the result here. See, if you flip this over, that's what you want. You don't really want to see more than just a teeny tiny bit of that stitching line. So now this is where the magic comes in. So let me flip this all right side out, and you can take your pins out here. Don't forget those because you don't want anything snagging. And so is that not beautiful? So from here, we go over to the pressing table. So I will meet you there. When I have my hand underneath, if you need a pressing mitt, by all means, you could scald yourself if you're not careful. So really what we're doing is we're pressing all of the seam allowances, everything, into the cap. Notice I haven't put the iron down. I like to press this. I think it gives a softer roll than putting the iron down on it. So the advantage of just putting your hand under is that you know when the steam has saturated, so you know all the layers are ready to be shaped. So but again, be careful. This is my iron is quite hot. Of course, it's a wonderful iron. Okay, so now let me just hold this up to the camera so you can revel in there better. So there's the peak lapel, there's the shoulder, and that is how I like a sleeve cap to look. So let's go back to the table and survey what we've just done. So here we have the jacket with the sleeves installed. So it's starting to look like a jacket. It's coming together. Next thing we'll be dealing with is the lining, but I just want you to see what we've done here. Here's the bottom. Sleeves are all the way down to the bottom. So now I'm going to bring it in close so you can have a look at the cap itself. And this is a close-up of what we have just achieved. Setting the sleeve in, setting the shoulder pads and the sleeve heads. So now that these sleeves are installed, we can start thinking about lining.